You mock power, and if it fails, then it was illegitimate power. I mean, that's what comedy and mockery does. It undermines illegitimate power. That's what you see in this movie so beautifully, is how the facade of that tyrannical power comes apart as soon as you mock it and you see if it cracks. And that's why it's good to be suspicious of anything that's intolerant of comedy and mockery. It's healthy. It's one of the hallmarks of any healthy society that has free speech, that we can laugh and mock at anything. We can laugh and mock anything because it's flexible. There's that sense of rigidity that comes with despotic power that can't tolerate criticism or mockery. And it's that rigidity that makes those systems so self-destructive. They ultimately self-destruct. They end up destroying themselves because they're so rigid and so closed off to what they need to change course and improve, that they self-destruct. So a system that is flexible also requires tolerance for comedy and mockery. If not, you can bet that you're going to watch it disintegrate eventually.
But it's kind of a symptom of the thing instead of the, how should I put this? Like, so we have a system, broadly speaking, let's say in our country, where we believe that satire and comedy, regardless of whether it's political power or some other sort of power center, that it's, see, I think of it more as a test of validity as opposed to a necessary thing to do all the time. So one can assume there may exist something like legitimate power, or at least doing better than not, somewhat legitimate power. Then in theory, there would still be satire and comedy, and then you would see the response wouldn't be so rigid and totalitarian, as you say. And then that in and of itself would be able to satisfy people to say, oh, okay, maybe this has some legitimacy to it, right? Because the other viewpoint is, well, like if you're just constantly trying to tear things down over and over and over again, what if the thing does have some merit? It gets complicated.
It ends up, if you take on that kind of like maniacal mockery mode, I think it ends up turning people off, because remember that comedy is also an art. And so it has to be true. It cannot be propagandistic or in this kind of like really pointed, agenda-driven way of like, oh, we're going to just decimate this figure. That's no longer really comedy then. That's a hit job, And so...
and there's a system built in that actually protects it, which is that comedy is a communal... There's an audience. If you're not getting laughs, if you're not getting a response, then maybe that in and of itself is a hint that comedy is becoming that type of of ideologically centered trying to get at something when it's not funny anymore. And everyone can tell, man, just deep down, everyone can tell there's something, maybe this is useful. Maybe there is something in us as humans that self-regulates this whole process. That the comedy goes out. If the leader or the group or whatever over-responds, we see a problem there. The comedy goes out towards the target. The audience, this isn't that funny. There's something maybe wrong with the approach of the comedian. Maybe they're just a shitty comedian. But also, maybe there's something there that tells us, oh, this is just an ideological attack covered in what is called comedy. I don't know. I could be wrong about all this. I have no idea.
Yeah, well, that's the thing about comedy. It's incredibly stripped down. You're standing on a stage. You're just a human being speaking to human beings, ultimately. So it doesn't leave a lot of room for, that kind of like maneuvering. I think that kind of agenda-driven comedy, there's the logic of, well, we laugh at it because we're supposed to laugh at it. And that's when you start to get into the weird ideological shit that is happening. I mean, like feminist comedy. That shit fucking sucks. I'll say it right now. Like, I'm sure there's some feminist comedy that's good, but there's very clear difference between making fun of shit that's genuinely funny and doing it in a good way, but making a true point. You can make a point about shit that's true and meaningful while still being funny. But if you start making your point ahead of being funny, you're not a comedian anymore. You're a preacher. And so if people are going to see you because they want to laugh, but you're preaching at them, that's not comedy. But you start to get into this weird new culture where, oh, well, I'm supposed to laugh at the joke about sexism or whatever, or I'm supposed to laugh at this idea or whatever. And that's that same fucked up feedback loop that you see happen in authoritarian regimes, where you can't criticize. You can't say that the emperor isn't wearing clothes. That's that same issue with why you need to tolerate comedy and mockery of power, because it shows you it's truthful, it's honest. And so I think it's the same thing. It kind of parallels that.
Well, I'm not really familiar with the genre of feminist comedy.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there's some brilliant stars. I don't know. I don't actually watch a lot of like stand-up comedy or whatever. But what does remind me, you're absolutely right, whether it's feminist or whatever it is, this ideologically based comedy, it reminds me, and you say, well, the audience feels a responsibility to applaud, okay? Well, so if you look at like, I don't remember who it was. This happened, I think it was Stalin. I don't remember. It was communist regime leaders. I don't remember the specifics of who this was. And I'm sure that variants of this have occurred in all types of totalitarian regimes. You would have speeches and people, the audience would be forced to stand and applaud, and not only that, they would be timed by, like, it's like Stalin's speech, it's gotta be a minimum of 5 minutes of just constant applause after he says X.
Oh my gosh.
It becomes so regimented. And then of course, I remember being in Eastern Europe and people talking to people about how during, like, there would be state-sponsored parades where it's like they just gather up everybody and it's like, you got to go to the parade, you got to stand there and hold a sign or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and so it reminds me of that. And it doesn't, I just have this feeling, my hope is that these types of perversions of the common impulses in human beings to laugh, when these perversions of that come up, that the system itself will fall eventually. I'd like to say, and I think that so far that's basically been the case. My concern and dread is that there will become systems of control invented in the future using technology that obscure these natural mechanisms for getting rid of totalitarian type regimes.